Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. Gavin, Schall, Alex Wolfe, a trade primer. Who's the next big name the New York Knicks will go after? Is it an old flame in Donovan Mitchell, a new one in Dejounte Murray? Someone else will have it for you next on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks, and today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today, and every day is now available on all platforms. That includes on YouTube. So if you want to see our smiling faces on a day-to-day basis, we've actually been there for like 2 years now. Get with the program and subscribe and hit that notifications bell so you never miss an episode. And be sure to do the same on your favorite audio podcast platform of choice. Then if you want to take things to the next level, be sure to hit the link in the description and subscribe to our Subtext, where Alex and I will text you our thoughts on the New York Knicks, the latest rumors, the latest reports every single day before and after each game. And you can ask us your questions. He's Alex. He's the editor-in-chief of The Strickland, the greatest Knicks website in the whole wide world. You can check them out on all forms of social media at thestrict.land. I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And with that, Alex, it is time to talk some trades. OG Anunoby, we used up our dopamine rush on that. He's awesome. I'm excited to have him. But God damn it, I want some more. I want another trade to talk about. And we're going to start off with some stars. We're treating this episode as sort of a primer. So maybe we'll end up doing it because that's just kind of what we do. But our intention is not to go super deep on any one player, but just to sort of run through a bunch of different names, the odds on each guy. And then as we get closer and closer to deadline, presuming the Knicks don't make a move, we will go deeper and deeper on individual guys. So after that long caveat, Alex, I kind of think there's only two places we could start. The first two names on this list. Which one do you want to start with?
Well, let's start somewhere different, which is just do the asset rundown of what the Knicks have available. I think, before you go to the poker table, you want to take assessment of your chips, right? And make sure you know what you have to work with here.
I'm terrible at poker, so this is a good
well,
lesson.
There we go. This will be good for you. This will be good for you. All right. So the Knicks have, as far as first round picks, they have Dallas's top 10 protected first round pick. That's top 10 protected for the next 2 years, or else conveys as 2 second round picks, still from the Kristaps Porzingis trade. Notoriously did not convey this past year, so that's got 2 more years of protections on it. Presumably that is going to convey this year. Then they have 2 extremely unlikely to convey picks from Washington and Detroit, at least in the next couple years, unlikely to convey. Washington's pick is protected 1 to 12 this year, 1 to 10 next year, and 1 to 8 the year after, then conveys as 2 second round picks. Detroit's is protected 1 to 18 this year, so fat chance that's going to do anything. 1 to 13 next year, 1 to 11 the year after that, and then 1 to 9 in 2027, and then just conveys as 1 second round pick if it does not convey by then. Then they have Milwaukee's 2025 first round pick, which is protected picks 1 to 4. That's going to convey no matter what, because if it lands in 1 to 4, I believe it's New Orleans gets to keep it. So if Milwaukee tanks in 2025, they're kind of screwed no matter what. So they're probably not going to do that because they're still going to have Giannis Antetokounmpo, I assume. The Knicks also have all their own picks, which thanks to the Stepien rule, which is a rule that teams can't trade picks 2 years in a row. They can't trade their own pick 2 years in a row, which was, made to specifically protect teams like the old school Knicks from themselves, and make it so that they could not trade all of their draft capital, only half of it. So that means that the Knicks are able to potentially, if they wanted to make some nuclear offer to someone, include 8 first round picks, at least in name. I think those Washington, Detroit picks, maybe not quite as valuable as your average first round pick, but some people might disagree. So they have 8 first round picks they can throw into things. They also have a myriad of seconds that they can include. They have Utah's this year, Brooklyn's next year, Detroit's next year, even though they trade Detroit's for this year. In the OG deal, they have Detroit's for next year as well, which is, again, probably going to be quite valuable. 2 extra ones from Indy. They're missing a couple of their own second round picks, one from the Brunson quote tampering that they did. Another one from somewhere. I don't know. They traded it at some point. I lost track. Also, of course, they have Quentin Grimes. They have Mitchell Robinson that they could technically trade, who's a young-ish player on a pretty good contract if they decide that they want to stick with Isaiah Hartenstein. You cannot trade Deuce or Josh Hart thanks to their extensions until the offseason. They cannot be traded until or by the deadline. So as far as we're talking about deadline stuff, don't include them in any of your mock trades. They also possibly, it's been reported, they have a traded player exception that was generated in the OG Anunoby deal, which would have meant they technically consummated that as like two separate deals. So if they did that, then apparently that's around $5 million, which they can absorb a player into. They also have a TPE from the Obi trade because that was just a player for a couple second-round picks deal. So they have a traded player exception generated by that too, which I think is around the same amount, like $5 million or something like that. They also possibly will get a disabled player exception worth around $8 million for Mitch if that's approved by the league and they determine that he's going to be out for the year. Seems like the league is doing some injury reviews this week because they just fined the Nets for resting players. So, you know, maybe that's right around the corner. I don't know. But Gavin, at any rate, that's the situation of what the Knicks have to work with. So as much as you wanted to make me make the choice, I'm going to make you make the choice on who to talk about first.
All right. Well, the good news is it's not a super hard choice for me. I got to talk about Donovan Mitchell first, though. Maybe you'll have some pushback on this. So I'm going to actually talk this through myself. So Mitchell, I think, is clearly a better player than the number 2 guy on this list, Dejounte Murray, like just a different class. Like we mentioned it, maybe it probably went down a little bit after the Knicks kind of kicked his butt and contained him pretty well last series. But going to last year's playoffs, he was like the 7th all-time leading scorer in NBA playoff history in terms of points per game. And that was over a number of runs. All of them like very, very young into his Utah Jazz career. He's a bona fide elite playoff scorer. We know he is like a top like 2 to 3 percentile athlete in the NBA. His skill level, I would say, is like top 5%, top 10% in the NBA, whatever you want to say. There are very real defensive questions about the fit between him and Jalen Brunson. And then the other thing that gives me just a little bit of pause is the fact that it hasn't totally worked out between him and Darius Garland. And if it didn't really work out between him and Garland, who I would say is maybe even a little bit more pass first than Jalen Brunson is, maybe not the Jalen Brunson we've seen the last 2 games, but the Jalen Brunson we've seen over the last year and a half. Why would it work out really seamlessly between those two? You could make the argument that OG Anunoby as like kind of a flexible wing defender maybe helps them more than the Cavs like big interior defense does. Obviously, the Knicks also have rim protection, and they have Julius Randle. So there's not really anyone obvious to play off in the Knicks lineup. I think it would work really well. Dejounte Murray, on the other hand, Alex, he like the current version of him is just sort of a lesser version of Donovan Mitchell in my mind because he's become kind of an ISO artist in Atlanta. And yet the best version of him, at least in terms of type of player, is pretty much, again, outside of like an all NBA type of talent, like exactly what you would want to complete this current Knicks like star quartet, I guess it would be at that point, in that he was an absolutely elite defender on the San Antonio Spurs, like one of the 5 or so best guard defenders in the NBA. And this year, he's shooting fantastic from 3 for the first time in his career, 38% on 6.2 attempts per game. So if you could just cherry pick those qualities, like you can make the case that he's a better fit than Mitchell. My fear there is that he hasn't been those things on Atlanta. He's been the shooter, but not the defender. And then if you go back to the Spurs, he was the defender, but not the shooter. So it's kind of an interesting, like, just kind of how you see him. And because of that, I think Mitchell, like, if I were just to pick one, even though Mitchell's going to be more expensive, like, I'm probably taking that star swing, trying to add Donovan Mitchell and crossing every part of my body and hoping it works.
Yeah, I guess the other thing too is if you trade for Donovan Mitchell and then down the line, like you put in here as far as cost, and I'm in agreement with this. It would probably cost Evan Fournier, Quentin Grimes, and then like somewhere around like 4 or 5 firsts and or swaps. That's the other thing to consider when you consider that the Knicks can trade 8 first-round picks. If you pump that out to swaps too, I think they could do 12 first-round picks traded plus swaps, which is crazy. So I mean, they have some pretty good latitude. Like you can use half of that latitude on Donovan Mitchell and then still have some stuff to burn down the line, which is crazy. That said, like if Dejounte Murray, if it comes down to he's just sort of a a casualty of the Hawks not wanting to be a tax team, which they never have been the last few years. They're not really going anywhere this year, so they're not going to be like super enthusiastic about dipping into the tax next season to have another team that might not win, so they're going to be like, well, crap. Well, why would we do that? If they're in a little bit more of a leveraged position where the Knicks are able to give up like Fournier and like, I don't know, maybe those two protected first round picks that I'm not super fond of, the Washington Detroit ones, that at least on a ledger of a trade to sell to a fan base looks like, look, we got 2 first round picks back for Dejounte Murray, even though like you take one look at them after that and you're like, well, yeah, but are they ever going to convey? Because those two teams are terrible with like no real recourse right now. Like Detroit just looks really, really bad. And so does Washington. And Washington's even further back in their rebuild than Detroit is at this point, because they like just started it this year. So I think there's like a very real chance that Washington pick never conveys too. But if that's the case, then, I might be more on board with the Dejounte thing. And just for the fact of you get a good salary chunk, and then if things don't work out the rest of this season, then maybe you pursue Mitchell this offseason if the Cavs aren't super keen on trading him before this deadline, and if you would have to pay more of a tax to do it before this deadline. Because the thing is that over the summer, Donovan Mitchell is going to become an expiring contract. So because he can opt out of his final year of his deal after next season and then be a free agent and go wherever he wants. And, it's no huge secret that he wanted to come back to New York a couple years ago, and he probably still wants to come back to New York, especially if Cleveland like disappoints in the playoffs again this year. So that might give the Knicks a little more leverage to, potentially get that done for the same amount of picks, but you get to have that Dejounte rental this year. See if that works out. If by some chance that works out like crazy, then boom, you're set. But if not, then you have those options down the line. I think that's the reason that I would, out of those first two options or headliner options here, I would probably lean more Dejounte Murray and hope that he can reclaim that defensive acumen and figure things out a little more here than he did in Atlanta. And hopefully it would work better having a guy in Jalen Brunson next to him who's more comfortable without the ball in his hands than Trae Young, who is not much of an off-ball player at all, which I think made that sort of a difficult thing to begin with. But either one of those guys, I think, could also stagger really well and help run the bench unit and everything else. I would love to have either. I think that as far as Dejounte is concerned, though, I just would appreciate the flexibility going forward more compared to the cost it would take to make a deal happen by this deadline.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Around New Year's, we get obsessed with how to change ourselves instead of just expanding on what we're already doing, right? I know I am constantly guilty of that, and I kind of set these resolutions that are very extreme and ultimately unachievable and ultimately lead to disappointment. And I think therapy helps you manage your expectations for yourself. And maybe the better way to say that is just be a little bit more forgiving. You can find your strengths, so you ditch extreme resolutions and make changes that actually stick, because at the end of the day, isn't that what we're all trying to do? And that's certainly what I've gotten out of therapy. I mean, the ability to see what's realistic and what's actually going to benefit me the most versus having pie in the sky goals. So if you're thinking of starting therapy, it's a good idea to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, let's keep it rolling, Alex. We are going to go rapid fire through some other star level players that the Knicks could trade for. Let's start with a pair of Bulls. I'm going to start with DeMar DeRozan, because in some ways, even though he's way older, I kind of like him more than Zach LaVine. I honestly kind of love that he's an expiring free agent, and the Knicks could get him at a relatively cheap price. I think probably something like 2 lightly protected first round picks would get it done. That might even be more expensive. Like I think that's kind of anticipating a bidding war, plus Evan Fournier. You might have to give up one more thing to get it done from a financial perspective, because DeRozan makes $10 million $100 more than Fournier, so that trade exception doesn't quite get you there. But I think he's someone who's pretty likely to get traded who could be a decent fit for the Knicks. The only question there, if you're the Knicks, is he enough of an upgrade to vault you into meaningful championship contention? I personally don't think so, but I could see the Knicks talking themselves into it.
Yeah, I guess, do you want to be the team that is negotiating a new contract for 34-year-old DeMar DeRozan this coming off season? That would be the thing that would worry me. That said, the fact that he is an expiring deal, and given the way things have gone in Chicago, I think it's more than likely he's not going to stick around there. And they probably know that at this point. Probably deflates his value pretty well. I do worry about spacing. I worry about how much of a role he would demand on this team, which, maybe you could say is a similar thing for Dejounte. And I mean, Donovan Mitchell would just be like a next level star, so it doesn't matter. But like, is DeMar DeRozan going to come here and be like, well, you got to play me like 35 minutes a game in the starting shooting guard spot? And it's like, well, we run into problems when there's another guy on this team, that plays shooting guard sometimes that can't really shoot confidently from three all the time. And Josh Hart, do you really want to commit to that all the time? And granted, DeMar DeRozan's a much better player overall than Josh Hart, but I would worry a bit about that. I did think it was really funny that he was like jacking from three against the Knicks the other night, though. It almost felt like a tryout where he was like, look, guys, I could do it. I could do it. I promise I could shoot. I could shoot threes. The guy that can shoot threes, Zach LaVine, man, this is a load of bull here, right? There's a lot of bulls. But yeah, he's super efficient, shoots a high volume, really good athlete, whatever, really injury prone, which really worries me, and gets paid a ton of money. I mean, he gets paid as much as the biggest stars in the league, like upwards of $50 million by the end of his contract. I don't think he's one of those guys. And I wouldn't go for him. I mean, the chances that both those guys get traded, we had it here at like 60% for DeRozan, 65% for LaVine. I think those are probably pretty accurate. Like, if LaVine balls out a little bit before the trade deadline, I feel like the Bulls at this point would just be like, forget it. Let's just reset and just get off of both these guys and just kind of like do what we can to recoup what we did building this team, which was a ton of assets. They spent so many assets to have just a, quite frankly, terrible team now. So, it's, I guess we'll see what they end up doing. If I'm the Knicks, I wouldn't be super in love with going after either of them. Just for DeMar, it's like the timeline and age fit. With LaVine, it's like, I don't buy into LaVine overall as a player, and especially for the amount that he makes.
Yeah, I'm with you. Next guy we had on here is Lauri Markkanen. You wrote down for the fit, really, really interesting. I would concur on that. I think where we maybe disagree is like, I kind of think Julius Randle would be going out in the trade, except for the fact that Utah just doesn't really need Julius Randle, and they would probably, like, maybe it would be a 3-team deal where Randle's going to a third team. They're sending a bunch of assets to Utah. The Knicks are sending a bunch of assets to Utah, and the Knicks end up with Markkanen. But to your point here, like, Lauri has played three before. I think that limits his effectiveness just a little bit, just because his shooting isn't quite as special at small forward as it is at power forward. Though defensively, to your point, you are just enormous, because at that point, OG Anunoby is your starting two. Markkanen is like a 7-footer or like a 6'11" guy is your starting three. You have Randle at the 4. Isaiah Hartenstein for now, but you could, once you add Markkanen in there, between him, Anunoby, and Brunson, you could bring Mitchell Robinson back as a 5 and not really have totally major spacing issues. Though I think if Markkanen tried to drive, you would. I don't know, Alex. There's a lot going on there, but as you note here, you'd probably have to give up the farm for him, given that it's Danny Ainge, and there certainly aren't fond feelings there, and he would try to rob the Knicks blind in that kind of trade. And also, like, I know it was reported that he's quote unquote available. I think it would be absolutely absurd for Utah to trade Lauri Markkanen. As others have pointed out, he actually wants to stay in Utah, and that is extremely rare for an NBA superstar. So they should hold on to that guy for dear life. You have it at 25%. I think it's going to, to me, it's more like 10%. I don't think it's going to happen, but on paper, a fantastic fit for the Knicks.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on if, like, Ainge, he seems really interested in just going full rebuild. So if he's like, oh, we want to like tank out for the next 2 years and try to do essentially what Presti was doing initially, before Presti then decided, crap, we have too much talent. I guess we're not trying to tank for Wembanyama or whatever anymore, because now we have too much talent to do that.
My
or
bad,
he
guys. I drafted too well. Was essentially what happened.
exactly poor Oklahoma City. They drafted too well and weren't able to get Wembanyama, and instead just have one of the most exciting young teams since the last time they had one of the most exciting young teams. But anyway, yeah, it depends on if he wants to go that route or if he wants to follow the actualized version of what Presti did and just be like, well, I've got the stud in hand already. There's no point in trading him. And ultimately Presti didn't trade SGA, which worked out great for him. So maybe that's sort of changing the thought process of some of these GMs that were trying to bottom out, especially like parity is more prevalent in the NBA now than it's been in a long time. So I don't think it's super likely. Also, I'll just write out the trade package I wrote. I thought it was kind of funny. I thought you'd have to give up Fournier, Grimes, the rights to Rokas Jokibitis, 4 to 5 firsts, maybe the naming rights to Dolan's next real estate venture. And I don't know, like one of Leon Rose's children or something. Like, I don't know. It's going to take a whole thing.
Well, if you give up Leon Rose's children, you also give up OG Anunoby in the trade. So you don't want to do that.
I guess so, yeah, because that's his new baby. But yeah,
no, because Sam Rosen's his agent.
Oh yeah, that's true. And yeah, I didn't think about that. That's so hilarious. Anyway, but yeah, it's I don't think it's super likely either, but I do think it's a name that the Knicks should at least like make a call on. I would try running him at the 3 with Randall. If you could pull that deal off without trading Randall as part of the deal, and you could somehow do that with just a bunch of first round picks, if that's what Utah's motivated by, which in the past they have been, then I would do it and I would try to figure it out, because I think the Cavs were sort of on to something a couple years ago, and then they traded Markkanen as part of the Mitchell deal, which obviously tough to fault them with, but like that lineup that they had where they had Markkanen at the 3 weirdly really worked, and that was sort of where he started blossoming, and I wonder if you can make that work on the Knicks. I'll just briefly touch on this guy, Mikal Bridges. I think is really pretty much a perfect fit. I mean, it's especially if you ask the Knicks only like Villanova guys, people, they'd be like, oh my God, of course that's the guy they would trade for, because that's all the Knicks do is go after Villanova guys. But if you could do this without altering the starting lineup players, and then you could start Brunson, Bridges, OG, Randall, and Isaiah Hartenstein, I mean, that's a legitimate possible Eastern Conference Finals, possible finals team this year, just based off how balanced they are on both ends of the floor. The fact that Mikal gives you more than OG in like the creation department, while also giving you what he gives you on defense, would just be crazy. And to see those two whipping around the floor together, it's probably would cost a ton though, because like Brooklyn is throwing rumors out there already that they want to build with him still, which maybe that's a smokescreen. Maybe they're just trying to drive the cost up and ultimately trade him. But I don't think so. It seems like they're foolish enough to be like, I don't think that Mikal is a 1A superstar, but they seem foolish enough to think that that's the case, because they don't want to admit that they lost the Durant trade or whatever. So yeah, it would probably cost like Fournier, Grimes, like all of your picks. And that's just the baseline. I mean, I don't know. I don't think that it's going to happen. I would give him maybe a 10% chance of being moved by the deadline based off the smoke that's out there. But if the Knicks find a reasonable opportunity to go for him and don't have to pay too much of an in-division tax, I say go for it.
Yeah, to me, the biggest issue there is that the Nets just don't have any of their own picks, so there's no incentive for them to be absolutely terrible. Like, I think it's pretty clear, like, what Mikal did last year wasn't sustainable, and, like, he's best off as probably the 3rd best guy on your team instead of the best guy on your team. So maybe the world where they do it, to your point, is like if the Knicks give them a ton of assets and they feel like, all right, we're just going to turn that around right away with our Suns picks into, like, a true star, and maybe that's, like, that would be kind of ironic if they worked out a trade to get assets from the Knicks so then they could turn all their assets into Donovan Mitchell. But honestly, as a Knicks fan, like I'm fine with that. If the Knicks end up with Mikal Bridges, because I'm with you, like as much as Mitchell is a better player in a vacuum, Bridges is just such a fantastic fit. I would be cool with that. 3 names we had here, but don't have time to get to in depth. Jalen Green, Draymond Green, RIP, the Greens on this podcast, and Kevin Durant, who's the most fun one, but also the most unlikely one. Those 3 are probably not happening for various reasons, and maybe shouldn't happen for various reasons. But Alex, that would be a crazy bet to suggest Kevin Durant would be traded to the New York Knicks. But if I'm the kind of guy who likes to make a crazy bet or a more reasonable one, where do I ultimately go?
Well, that's where you want to head over to FanDuel. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. And the app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. You can make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and much more. As always, I'm going to highlight the same game parlays. No more fun way to juice up a game. You just spend you can do like $1 or $2 on some of these, because by the time you stack all the odds together, what basically happens is you take a bunch of smaller bets that normally wouldn't be worth a ton on their own and put them all together and wager them all against one another, where they all have to happen all at once. And so if you think you're like really smart and you know what's going to happen in a game, you could place one of those same game parlays and potentially win a bunch of money off a very small bet. So you can go in for like a low overhead and a huge amount of potential winnings, which makes any given game a lot more fun. Sometimes I do it on a Knicks game just for like an extra thing to jazz up the game for me. And it's always a ton of fun. So if you want to do that or any other type of betting, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, and we're back in, Gavin, and it's time to get into the role players and bench minimum. I call them like minimal role stopgap level players, like basically the guys that, based off our discussion last episode, would be sort of taking like Deuce McBride's minutes, and sort of just playing that smaller role, and maybe playing 10, 15 minutes a game tops, and hopefully not much more than that. But I want to talk about the role player level guys first, and we'll try to get through these guys somewhat quickly. But Malcolm Brogdon comes to mind first. I think he's a really good fit. I think, ironically, given how much we lamented his very existence last year, he could give you exactly what you need in that Emmanuel Quickley spot after he robbed Emmanuel Quickley of Sixth Man of the Year last year. He's averaging currently 16 points and 6 assists in Portland on 44% from the field, 41% from three, 79% from the free throw line. And like, as far as cost, he's not quite a rental. He has one more year left on his deal, and he's making roughly what Fournier does, but obviously he's an infinitely more useful player and could be a more appealing like building block to a trade, sort of similar to what we were saying about like Dejounte Murray too, where he has the salary that you could use later on. But Portland, it has a little more leverage because of that extra year, so it's not like you could just dangle like one first round pick, sort of like what you did with Josh Hart last year, and be like, well, if you don't trade him to us, he's walking this offseason. So, get something for him. So they might be able to squeeze you for like Fournier and maybe 2 of the protected first or something, but I'd be fully on board with that. I think you'd be a really good fit. I think the chances that they do trade him is probably 65 to 70%. The 30% or 35% that they don't is just if they say, you know what, we've got latitude to do this over the summer and find some team that wants to finish off their theoretical team rather than their actualized team, which sometimes pays bigger dividends, but also would come with the caveat of him being an expiring contract. So I don't know, but I think if the Knicks get a chance to do it and the cost is not too high, I think that's a perfect player for them to go after.
Oh yeah, I'm totally with you. You put this name down, and my eyes lit up. I was like, yep. I'm on board. I mean, quintessentially what the Knicks need at a relatively affordable price. A guy who started his career off as just like a straight up like bowling ball, like bully driver, and has become like an elite 3-point shooter on volume, a good enough playmaker, and like gives you, at least offensively, like pretty much everything you get from Emmanuel Quickley. Certainly not the same defender, certainly not the same, like maybe as good one-on-one or better one-on-one, but like not even the same universe as a team defender. But that is as close to like a one-to-one Emmanuel Quickley replacement as you could get. Obviously not with the same ceiling down the road, but in terms of like saving this season and making the OG trade worth it, like that is like maybe the guy out of everyone we talked about that I think most realistically ends up on the Knicks. The only issue there is I think there's going to be some real competition. Like just thinking about on the fly, like I bet the Sixers with all the assets they picked up in the Clippers trade, they're going to make a really compelling offer for him to try to juice up their bench. And Oklahoma City, who has the luxury to do whatever, like I think he's a good middle ground for them of not going like all the way in on this season, like messing with like the future salary cap implications for their young set of stars, but also like juicing what is now like legitimate championship hope. So I'm talking about Brogdon more and all the other teams because I just think he's that compelling from a Knicks perspective that it's worth exploring, and that's maybe worth a full podcast down the road. But Alex, in the meantime, how do you feel about Jordan Clarkson?
I think he would also be a pretty seamless fit into the IQ slot. His shooting from three is pretty bad this year, though. He's shooting 30% from three on like 5.5 attempts per game. You don't love that. He's also only a 34% shooter for his career from three, which was surprising to me. I thought he'd really turned that around in recent years, but kind of to the contrary. He shot like 31% on higher volume like 2 years ago. The year after his Sixth Man of the Year campaign, where he shot like 34%. So he shot about his career average that year from three. And then last year, I think also shot around 34%. So like, he's not actually that great of a 3-point shooter. He sort of just has that, like, he has the respect of teams from three, at least. So he provides that gravity at minimum, which is good. But also has been distributing at a higher level this year. He's averaging a career high in assists so far this year at like over 5 per game, which he's never done before in his career. So you get that too. Again, on defense, not really gonna, wow you or anything, but should be passable, hopefully, if you put him in a good enough system. He won't be starting. Maybe he'll close a couple games if he's like really cooking, but he's been a six man for, pretty much his whole career. Won a Six Man of the Year award as well. So he's got one of those under his belt, so there's some prestigious names in this like role player category, but I'd look into him if I was the Knicks. But again, if you got to pay the age tax, not great. Also, his contract situation is weirdly a little less appealing for the Knicks, I think, because he actually makes more this year and then much less the next 2 years. He signed apparently a very team-friendly extension with Utah, where he's only making about like 14 to 15 million the next 2 years after this. So 14, 15 million per season the next 2 years after this. So yeah, I don't know. I would still go for him though. I mean, he's obviously a talented scorer and fills a need. But I would not like him as much as Brogdon at all, especially if the cost is about the same.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just, this team so desperately needs ball handling and creation, and he brings that to the table. It's not a perfect fit, and I think it's something that would improve the Knicks pretty substantially in the regular season and come back to bite them in the playoffs a little bit. I just, maybe I'm wrong about this, because he's had some monster scoring efforts in close games against good teams. I just don't really see his game translating to the playoffs because of that lack of shooting that you mentioned, and that'll play fine. Like if he was truly a luxury piece and he was playing for 15 minutes, but the issue is whoever the Knicks get in this role, I ideally would be someone who's capable on the right night of closing games for them. And maybe that's true for Clarkson if he's hitting his threes, but he's not someone I want out there because he's not really going to be guarded to a great extent. And defensively is going to be a total liability. And that combination is not great next to Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle. Alex, you also had Marcus Smart on here, which I just don't see Memphis trading him at the end of the day. I think they gave up quite a bit to get him, and they want to be good with him, and they want to play him next to John Morant and see how that looks. And if that has to carry over into next season, that has to carry over into next season. But I'm with you in that he would be a pretty good fit for the Knicks.
Yeah, I guess it just depends on if Memphis wants to sort of lightly blow it up this year, considering I think their season is more or less over at this point. Like, I don't think they're going to be able to dig out of the hole that happened when Morant wasn't playing and like get into the playoffs at this point or something, because the West is really competitive and there's a lot of good teams ahead of them. And it's too much to make up at this point. I mean, they were really bad without Morant. So if they just decide like, hey, like we're willing to give this guy up, then I think the Knicks should line up, because I think he would be a really, really good fit. Also removes one Knick killer from the world and puts him in a Knicks jersey, which would be awesome because he's certainly been one of the most horrendous Knicks killers, mostly in his time with the Celtics, obviously, since they haven't really gotten a look at him with the Grizzlies yet. But yeah, I would definitely go for him, but it's probably a pipe dream. I would give him maybe a 10% chance that they even trade him to any team, not even including the Knicks. Then as far as like the bench and minimal role stopgap level guys, I scoured the free agent market, who's, still on that carcass and hasn't been picked yet. And also one notable name at the end, but the first guy I'll bring up is George Hill. Not a bad fit. He's like the ageless wonder. This dude has just been contributing to pretty good basketball teams for like his whole career, and always seems to play well, and is still a free agent at this point. As far as I know, is not ready to hang it up or anything. So he's probably just waiting for that call around mid-season, like right around now, for some team to call and be like, hey, you want to help us out for the back half of this year? Let's do something. I don't think he's like so old or washed up or anything that he's going to hurt you in 10 to 15 minutes per game. And he's certainly a smart player. He's going to take care of the ball, shoot threes, but can, credibly dribble the ball down the floor, get a play set up, do all that good stuff that you need. All it'll cost you too is James Dolan's cash, veterans minimum contract for the rest of the year, probably. So I don't know. I made this one not just the odds that he goes anywhere, but that he goes specifically to the Knicks. Like, if they find themselves like that, they don't make another trade, and especially like something somewhat splashy, and they're like, you know what, let's just get a capable body in here and just ride this season out, and we'll figure the rest of this out in the offseason. I think Hill's a really, really good candidate there.
Yeah, I think I disagree. I think to me, he's point guard Taj. Like, he only shot 31% from three last season. I guess the year before you could say he shot 36, which obviously isn't, or at least on Milwaukee, he only shot 31%. And in a really small sample size with Indiana, he shot 52%. That was taking 2 per game. All right, so maybe I'm being too harsh on him just based on that one stat, but doesn't really defend at this point in his career. Like, doesn't really play make in was playing 19 minutes per game on the Bucks and only got 2.5 assists in those minutes. Like, he's fine. I don't think he's. I think I'd rather like bet on Deuce McBride figuring it out, or Malachi Flynn for that matter. He can space the floor a little bit, so maybe I'm talking myself into it a little bit. It's definitely not a terrible suggestion, but I don't know. I'm
looking at him as I see him as like a 10-minute per game guy. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think
I got you. No, I know. But I'm just like, I think it would honestly go like Taj, where you did that for 2 or 3 games. And then in the wrong matchup, someone would just torch him for like 5 minutes and Tibbs would say, screw this. And we'd never see him again. But maybe that's fine. And maybe that's worth the risk. The next guy you had on here was Austin Rivers, who I'm maybe a little bit more open to, just because I think defensively it doesn't look quite as bad. My only issue there is like, it's kind of what you said, I think you nailed it last night. Like, for both these guys, I'd rather just play DiVincenzo an extra 10 minutes per game at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. And, Austin Rivers too. The other thing is he and Tibbs have sort of a bad past with his last stint on the Knicks. Things didn't exactly end well there. But if you want another warm body who's familiar with the team and who is a guy that's been on the Knicks already, he's maybe worth looking at. But I don't think it's a very high chance, because he wasn't a Leon Rose guy. He was a Steve Mills guy. So I don't think it's super likely that he ends up on the Knicks. And then Ish Smith is the last guy. So that would be, or actually, wait, was he a Leon Rose guy? Yeah, I guess Leon Rose did sign Austin Rivers, now that I think about it, because that was the 20 to 21 season that he was here. Yeah. All right, never mind. Well, whatever. Yeah, so maybe the bridges are fixed. I don't know, whatever. Anyway, Ish Smith, let's make all Clyde's dreams come true. Give a 2nd-round pick and one of those traded player exceptions to Charlotte, and let's make this thing happen. What do you think?
Yeah. Clyde's been away for a while. I apparently just some R&R. So that would be the ultimate welcome back present from the Knicks, and I'm down for it.
All right. Well, I think that's it for this episode. We went longer than we thought we were going to. So much for a primer. But anyway, thank you all for listening. And we'll have more on some of these guys, unless the Knicks just like really are determined and make a trade by like this weekend or something, which I'm not totally ruling out. I would not be surprised if they just want to move fast and get this team gelled and ready for the playoffs as soon as possible. But if they don't do that and things stretch out to the trade deadline, we'll certainly be talking about these guys in full episodes. Hopefully with some of our colleagues from the Locked On Podcast Network, and getting some insider perspective from local markets and all that good stuff. But till that time, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you all soon. And we'll have a game recap for you guys in a very big division matchup tomorrow morning against the Sixers. So keep your ears out for that as well. Till next time, though, thank you for listening. Talk to you soon. Peace out, everybody.